Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We're so excited about all that we're presenting. I'm Kelly Pirtle with NOAA Communications in Norman, Oklahoma, and I'm also a member of NOAA's Central Region Collaboration Team, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Our 3-minute thesis webinar has been organized by the NOAA Central Region Collaboration Team as a way to increase knowledge and awareness of projects and research in specific areas, and in this case, citizen science. This model is a format used by universities across the country as a way to briefly share information about a project, initiative, or research. Each presenter you will hear from today will have only 3 minutes and 1 slide to cover their topic. You can see from the list, we have a variety of topics and presenters from NOAA, along with partners from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, Colorado State University, NASA, Michigan Sea Grant, and the USGS. We'll hear about projects from weather and climate to salmon and sea lions. We will have 3 sections, as you can see on the agenda, with 3 speakers each and a break for questions in between from the audience after each section, like I said. At any point during the presentations, please submit your questions in writing using the questions pane of the GoToWebinar. We really do want to respond to your questions, and we will have time to do that. Bethany Perry, the coordinator for the NOAA Central Region Collaboration Team, will collect your questions throughout the webinar. And I'd also like to acknowledge Jeff Zeltwanger from the National Weather Service Training Center, who is providing our technical support. The good news is we are recording today's webinar, and it will be available for viewing by anyone who wasn't able to attend today. This is our 2nd time doing this, and we really do appreciate and want your feedback. Please take a moment at the conclusion of today's webinar to complete a very brief survey. And I want to remind you that during today's presentation, everyone except the presenters will be in listen-only mode. If you experience technical problems, please use the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. With that, I think we are ready to begin. We're pleased to kick off our webinar with John McLaughlin, the Education Program Manager for NOAA's Office of Education, and he is also NOAA's Citizen Science Co-Coordinator. John will provide an introduction to citizen science. John, take it away.
All right, thank you, Kelly, and thanks to all of you for the interest in citizen science. Let's start by defining what we are talking about, which is a form of open collaboration in which individuals or organizations participate voluntarily in the scientific process. And this definition comes from the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act of 2017, which also explains citizen science volunteers can participate in any portion of the scientific process, such as the formulation of research questions or interpreting the results of data. In other words, they do more than collect data. So please keep that in mind when envisioning a citizen science effort. Please also note this work goes by other names, such as community science, volunteer monitoring, and public participation. It is not new. It can be argued it has been around as long as science itself. However, citizen science is drawing increased interest of late because the field has been growing rapidly over the past decade. This growth is in part due to new and emerging technologies, which make it easier for people to participate, as well as expand the ways in which they can do so. The smartphones, which so many people carry in their pockets, are remarkably powerful tools for fieldwork, as you'll see employed in some of the projects presented today. Smartphones allow observations to be seamlessly paired with additional data such as GPS coordinates, photos, compass directions, data from accelerometers and magnetometers, etc. The growth in low-cost pairable sensors, image recognition algorithms, augmented reality, and other developments are continuing to expand what can be done with our phones. Online projects such as Stellar Watch, which you'll learn more about, allow participants to analyze imagery, data sets, or audio files from their own computer. You may be asking, why is this all meaningful? Well, when used with intentional design, citizen science tools can have multiple outcomes. They can expand research and monitoring efforts, provide authentic learning experiences, and benefit communities by serving as conduits to data. I will caution they do not offer a solution to all issues, though. Rather, think of them as a tool in the toolbox. The growth in the field has been supported by the emergence of associations and communities of practice, as well as the development of resources that promote best practices. Within our agency, we have the NOAA Citizen Science Community of Practice. If you're a NOAA staff member or a member of an affiliate network and would like to join this community, please email me at john.mclaughlin@noaa.gov. You can also visit the citizenscience.gov website to learn more about projects and access resources from across the U.S. federal government and beyond. With that said, let's continue with the webinar and learn more about what this all looks like in practice. Thank you.
Thank you for that great introduction, John. Our next presenter is Laura Ormland. She is with NOAA Fisheries, and she is the other NOAA Citizen Science Co-Coordinator. Laura will provide a quick overview of the current state of citizen science and some guidance related to citizen science.
Thanks for the opportunity. As indicated, I'm going to provide an overview of existing legislation and guidance on citizen science, which applies government-wide and in some cases specifically to NOAA. And I also want to let folks know that all the links and the reports and information provided here will be provided after the webinar in case you don't want to take notes. So I'll start with the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act, which was signed into law in January of 2017. It grants federal agencies the direct authority to use citizen science to stimulate and facilitate broader public participation in the advancement of federal agency missions, even though citizen science has also been around certainly a long time, as John mentioned. It defines citizen science, and it provides guidance to federal agencies on how to conduct citizen science if this is the piece of legislation used as the justification for conducting the activity. But it's important to note that it does not provide a mandate to conduct citizen science. The Act also mandated a report on the projects and activities carried out under the Act, which I'll talk about next. This report on federal citizen science and crowdsourcing activities came out in June 2019. It provided highlights on crowdsourcing and citizen science activities directly conducted by federal agencies in FY17 and FY18 under the Act, as well as some activities conducted under other authorities. It highlights 86 citizen science and crowdsourcing activities reported by 14 departments and agencies, 13% of which were NOAA. I don't have time to go through all the stats on the NOAA activities, but just to give you an example of their impact, just over half of the projects had nearly 300,000 volunteer hours. In addition, Dr. Kelvin Drogemeyer, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology, was there specifically to help roll out the report and expressed explicit support by the administration for citizen science. He also indicated that when at the University of Oklahoma, he had funded some citizen science research of his own. Moving on to some guidance that applies specifically to NOAA, the NOAA Science Advisory Board was asked to report on citizen science in terms of its current use and potential value to NOAA to enhance data collection and monitoring needs in support of ecosystem-based management. They released their final report and recommendations in fall of 2018. In short, their conclusion was to expand citizen science at NOAA from outreach and education to a recognized, supported component of research. They had several recommendations, but two of which I'll highlight here is that one, citizen science is likely an underutilized tool for environmental data collection, and also that citizen science doesn't just happen. It requires intention. And for programs to contribute meaningful data to NOAA ecosystem science and management, they need to be built over time and receive ongoing support. NOAA leadership, including the NOAA Research Council and Rear Admiral Gallaudet, have been briefed on citizen science, these recommendations, and have expressed explicit support for citizen science at high levels. The final element I want to mention is the NOAA Administrative Order 216-115A, which is on research and development. And just to indicate that it recognizes citizen science as a tool for accomplishing R&D by engaging with external partners. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Laura. Next up, we have Kenny Diber from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Kenny will share with us strategies to support learning through participation in citizen science.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Kenny Dibner. I'm a Senior Program Officer and Study Director with the Board on Science Education. And in 2018, the Board on Science Education completed a study called Learning Through Citizen Science, Enhancing Opportunities by Design. That study was sponsored by the Simons Foundation, HHMI, and the Moore Foundation. And for those of you that don't know, studies at the National Academies of Sciences are guided by a statement of task. And that statement of task serves to help focus our work. And in this case, the statement of task asked us to consider whether or not learning is possible for participants in citizen science projects. And if so, what is the smartest way to go about getting learning in that context? So let's look at the first bullet. So the first thing I want to note is that we found clear evidence that people can and regularly do learn from participating in citizen science. That, however, does not mean that participating in citizen science is going to just automatically lead to learning. In fact, learning is unlikely to happen unless the designers of citizen science projects intentionally plan for it. So next bullet, please. What does that mean? What does it mean to intentionally plan? In our review of citizen science projects across the country, we learned that when citizen science projects were done with intentional, specified learning outcomes and sort of delineated in advance, it allowed project designers to collaborate with community experts and education partners to design a citizen science experience that facilitated learning outcomes. And part of our work was to sort of ask the question, why would somebody want to attend to learning other than it's a nice thing to do? Well, it turns out that when you take care of learning, when participants are learning in their participation, it advances both the science, as the citizen science, and the community outcomes, so the community partnership aspect of the work. And next bullet. Okay, oh, great. So one of the last points is that we learned that when you're taking into account issues of accessibility, inclusion, and equity, learning is more likely to happen via participation in citizen science. So when you're accounting for the equity, learning's more likely to happen, which is more likely to support advanced scientific outcomes. That's all I have for now.
All right, thank you, Kenny. We will now take a few minutes to address some of the questions that you and the audience have. Remember, you can type your questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. So I think Bethany is going to read some questions for us.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. The first question I have is for John. John, curious what advice you would offer to someone looking to start a citizen science project.
Thanks, Bethany. I'd say don't go it alone. Look at what's out there before you start a project. Find collaborators. Almost all of our projects are done through collaborations. And learn the lessons of others. Doing citizen science is part science and part art. So find people with experience in applying it successfully. And consider the needs and interests of project participants, not just what you're trying to get out of a project. This is particularly important if you want to engage audiences that are typically underrepresented in science. And once your project is started, keep in close touch with those participants. Make sure they feel involved and part of a community. Offer options for the alpha volunteers who are going above and beyond to participate in additional ways to make sure you're leveraging and supporting their interest in your topic. So those are a few initial thoughts, and definitely visit citizenscience.gov and the toolkit there to see additional steps in choosing when citizen science is appropriate and then appropriately applying it when it is.
Thanks, John. That's great advice. Another question that came in for Laura. can you tell us whether NOAA has any citizen science funding opportunities available?
Sure, no, that's a great question. You know, there are some federal funding opportunities that do call out citizen science. In other words, the federal funding opportunity isn't 100% focused on citizen science, but there are elements which applicants could submit proposals under. For example, the FY 2020 Marine Debris Prevention Federal Funding Opportunity calls out potential support for monitoring activities undertaken by volunteers. Or another example, the NOAA Office of Education recently issued a funding opportunity for projects designed to build environmental literacy of K-12 students and the public. And it does encourage projects to consider integrating citizen science tools when appropriate. I'll also indicate we're working to initiate a data call where we can actually have a full inventory of funding opportunities throughout NOAA that do include citizen science, either specifically by name or by another related name like community science. So, but that would be the current state of what's available.
Great, thank you, Laura. And John, to follow up kind of similarly, does NOAA have resources that they offer for folks interested in utilizing citizen science tools?
Yeah, great question. And I think the answer varies a little bit by whether or not the person is NOAA staff. For those people, we do offer the community of practice, which I mentioned, which basically opens up sharing opportunities for its members and has a web portal that includes a library of resources and documentation. For those outsider agencies, you can find a lot of this through citizenscience.gov. A lot of our members were involved in helping create the toolkit there, and you'll see our projects represented in the catalog. So it really gives options to connect to those projects. Additionally, a lot of our members are active in associations such as the Citizen Science Association. So connecting to that association gives the opportunity to connect to our projects and the lessons learned and the resources they offer. I think Laura did a great job of overviewing the funding opportunities that we do offer for citizen science, and grants.gov is the place to find those. You can do a keyword search, and as Laura mentioned, we do have some open now that specifically offer some support for citizen science. So those are a few of the ways you can connect with us. And as I mentioned earlier, most of our projects are done in collaboration with, basically citizen science at its heart is always a collaboration, but most of our projects are run in collaboration between our agency and partners who help run the project. So we are always looking for new partners and working with partners.
Well, thanks, John. This next question is for Kenny. Kenny, there's a term to designing citizen science for equity. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. One of the things that the committee found was that when you were designing to support learning outcomes, it was critically important to consider the audience of people you were trying to engage and approach that design with that audience as collaborators and engaging that audience as a partner who brings specific assets to the work. And part of recognizing these assets is also about taking care of all of the folks who walk in the door who are trying to participate. And so there are lots of different ways that you might think about ensuring that the design that you're working on is accessible. One of the things that we talk about is the importance and the value of translating project materials into the home languages of folks in the community you're trying to engage. Another one of these things that we're talking about is considering how to make the experience physically accessible if it's something that it is in a field or in the field rather and requires mobility. Aids to support folks who are trying to participate with visual impairments. These kinds of considerations of all of the various and sundry issues that folks might bring with them as they're participating will really help allow folks to focus on the work and can support engagement and support desired learning outcomes.
Great, thanks, Kenny. Appreciate it. And then our last question for this section, John, I think would probably be best for you or Laura. And the question is, what's the value of having a community of practice within an agency as well as across the federal government?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it actually goes even beyond just within our agency and within the federal government. There are actually communities that have started at multiple levels, and they've really all started within the past 5 or 6 years. We started our community of practice here at NOAA in 2013, and the federal community of practice, the interagency one started in 2013 as well. But we've also seen communities sprouting up within NOAA, such as in our Sea Grant network, where there has been a lot of growth in citizen science recently. And then, of course, there's a Citizen Science Association, which is field-wide. So people have a choice of deciding what level of community they are comfortable with and where they might most benefit. So they can, if somebody in the Sea Grant network, for example, can participate in the Sea Grant community, and then we see a few people from the Sea Grant community who come up to the NOAA community of practice. And then in our NOAA community of practice, we have, I think it's about 240 members, and we found that about 40 of those go up to the federal community of practice. And then not all members of the federal community of practice decide to go up to the Citizen Science Association level. So people really get to choose what level of resource sharing and sharing of best practices they find most useful for their particular needs. So it's been interesting to watch all this in the past 5 years, these different levels of communities sprout up, and it seems there are people who find interest in different particular levels.
Great, thank you, John. And we've got a couple more questions that we'll hold till the end, but right now we need to get back to our panelists. So Kelly, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Bethany, and thank you, presenters, for your thoughtful answers to these questions. We'll now transition to our second section and learn about some specific citizen science examples. We're going to start with Noah Newman. He is with the Colorado Climate Center, and he will cover CocoRaHS, a very long-standing and popular effort to report precipitation across the country.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's have some fun. CocoRaHS is a citizen science project with about 20,000 volunteers. We're in all 50 states, Canada, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas. And everyone in the network sets up a manual gauge in their backyard, similar to what you see in the middle of the screen. And they report their daily amounts to our website, where the data are used by several different users. This project is so easy that by the end of these 3 minutes, you will be trained and ready to go as a volunteer for CocoRaHS. So CocoRaHS can be summed up with the picture that we see in the lower left part of the screen, where we're looking at a storm from an airplane window. Everyone has experienced this, where you can see it raining like across the street, but not on you. Rainfall is so variable that a storm could slip right in between 2 weather stations, and we would never know how much fell. So the image that we see on the left is not a topo map. It's actually a map depicting rainfall amounts from the storm that initiated CocoRaHS back in 1997. This map took months to compile. After knocking on doors, asking around for anyone with a gauge in their backyard or maybe even a bucket, that's how we built that map. And the community responded by people volunteering to set up rain gauges and reporting their amounts. And that idea quickly sprouted, and now 20 years later, we are the single largest source of daily precipitation data for the United States. So moving to the middle of the screen, we see the simple tools required to join. You got the rain gauge, and it has 3 parts besides the mounting bracket. It's the funnel, the outer cylinder, and the inner cylinder, which is called the measuring tube, and that's highlighted in orange in the middle there. The funnel, it forces the rainfall into the measuring tube, where when it fills up all the way to the top, that would equal 1 inch. So we report to the nearest 1/100th of an inch, and if you look closely at the inner tube in that orange box there, you can see that it's measuring 91/100ths of an inch. And then in cases where it rains more than an inch, it starts to overflow into that larger main cylinder. And in those cases, what you do is you pour out your first inch from that inner tube, and you write it down, and then you use the funnel to pour the remaining amount into the inner tube until you've added everything up, and then you're done. And then for snow, besides measuring the depth like you see with the ruler, we bring the funnel and the inner tube inside, and you let the snow fall into that larger outer cylinder. And then with that, you bring that inside and you melt that snow and you pour it into your measuring tube to figure out the water content. And then finally for hail, you simply take a piece of styrofoam, you cover it with tinfoil, and boom, you've got yourself a highly scientific piece of equipment that's you can actually see the different number of hailstones, the sizes, and you can actually even see the angle of impact if wind was in the mix as well. So finally, how are the data used? Well, once you submit your data, it goes onto a map where you can instantly view and compare your dot with others. And any day that you submit your data, your dot is helping the National Weather Service with ground truthing their radar and satellite estimates. But besides the NWS, there's NOAA's river forecast centers, there's the regional climate centers, we've got hydrologists, emergency managers, researchers, agriculture, the insurance industry. So sometimes it's actually better to say who is not using our data. And thank you very much. That's the end of my slide.
Thank you, Noah. I know COCORAS is a very popular program. We'll now hear from Kim Elmore. He is with NOAA's National Severe Storms Laboratory and the University of Oklahoma Cooperative Institute for Mesoscale Meteorological Studies. He's going to tell us about Emping, a free app that provides a way for the public to report weather.
Thanks, Kelly. This is the beginning of it, and people know what they look at when stuff comes down out of the sky, and we had a good reason to try to collect all that. And so we fired off the Emping project in December 19th, 2012. And what you're looking at here is a 2-hour accumulation of reports from people on February 12th, 2013. Each icon represents different precipitation type that's tagged in time and space with GPS. So there's no doubt about where this is or where it came from. And people did this fundamentally with their iPhone. This display or smartphone. This display is available at that address, which you see at the bottom, to the public free of charge. The app is also free, and it's available in the App Store and in Google Play. And so anyone can download the thing and use it. No registration is required. We don't collect any PII, and you can't figure out who the people are. The data are used for algorithm and model development and to verify operational models. And this is not a trivial thing to do. And it's been used, and I'm kind of surprised at how many publications now have come out, because I had to canvass that recently. And it's pretty much, with Emping, we can find observations of things that the automated systems can't see, like ice pellets. But the NWS gets this stuff in real time too, and they use it to refine short-term forecasts, verify their forecasts, and they've even used it to receive severe weather reports. Anybody can get this entire data set for free if they use it for academic research, or if they're a local government entity, or if they're the military. Now, so far, we've collected a little over 2 million observations since December 2012, but in the case of meteorology, there is no such thing as too much data or too many observations. There have almost been no data quality issues, and that's because this is crowdsourced. They're all independent. Bad data are pretty much buried by the good data that the crowd provides to us. Well, what are we going to do now with it? Depending on funding, we're going to update the apps. We may add snow depth measurements. We may be able to fill in missing or unavailable automated observations. But to be successful, we need a lot of people to participate. And I'm done. You have the web addresses down at the lower right-hand corner, so you can go look at all kinds of stuff.
Thank you, Kim. I have Emping on my phone, and I have made reports before. Next up, we have Allison Leidner from NASA headquarters. She will talk about the GLOBE program, which is an international science and education program for students and the public to participate in data collection and the scientific process.
Great. So before I even go into the GLOBE program, I actually wanted to take a step back and explain to you that NASA uses a vantage point of space to study Earth as a system. And what we do is we make high quality, scientific grade, repeated measurements over space and over the planet to understand the Earth as a system in multiple dimensions and the interactions among them. And what the GLOBE program does, the Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment program, is use the vantage point of the ground using students, teachers, and citizen scientists around the world to study the Earth. And so that's the reason why NASA is very proud to be involved in the GLOBE program. And this Worldwide Science and Education program is approaching its 25th anniversary, so you can come celebrate with us next spring on Earth Day, actually. And then while this is sponsored by NASA, we work very closely with NOAA, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of State, who have been longtime key partners. And just because I know that this is largely a NOAA crowd, I want to emphasize that NOAA sites can become GLOBE partners to support educators. For example, the Elkhorn Slough National Estuary Research Reserve. And John McLaughlin, who you heard from earlier, is actually my NOAA counterpart for the GLOBE program. So if you have any questions, you can also talk to him as well. So what is the GLOBE program? With one of 55 protocols developed and vetted by the scientific community, teachers who get trained either online or in person can make measurements, as I said, in one of 55 protocols focusing on the atmosphere, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, or the pedosphere, which is soils, and contribute that information to the GLOBE database. And so they work with their students and have an access not only to the protocols themselves, but also learning activities that are tailored towards specific grades so that they can help connect the measurements that are making to actual learning in the classroom. GLOBE by the numbers, there's 122 countries with over 35,000 schools, over 35,000 teachers. And right now we have nearly 174 million measurements in the database, which I think just gives you a perspective on the value of this data set, and in some cases, 25 years worth of data. Recently, through additional funding, we've had the opportunity to expand the GLOBE program through an app called GLOBE Observer, which is the citizen science arm of the GLOBE program. And through GLOBE Observer, citizen scientists in any GLOBE country can make one of 4 measurements: clouds, mosquito habitats, land cover, and tree height, and can contribute that data as well. And that's really expanded the reach of the program, both because the app itself is very easy to use and it's a very nice, slick interface, but also because students and teachers can make measurements outside of the classroom, students, of course, with the permission of their parents, and also can engage citizen scientists who are interested in making measurements and connecting to NASA. And all of the data that's collected by the GLOBE program is available for use by students to do research with, which in fact they do. We have in-person and virtual research symposia that are really quite remarkable, and also are available for the scientific community to use as well. And that was a real motivator behind the beginning of the program. So with that, I think I've done maybe 10 seconds over according to my clock. I will end this and be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Allison. I feel like I'm learning so much. I hope you and the audience are as well. We will now take a few minutes to address some of your questions. And remember, if you have a question, type it in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. Bethany?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, and we've got a couple of questions. First, Noah, let me start with you. The question is, do people need to buy their own rain gauge to participate in CocoRoss?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question, and the short answer is yes. You do need to buy your own rain gauge. They typically cost about $30, a little bit more after shipping. We did at one point get some funding to give out rain gauges, and we found that people, when we just gave them away for free, it just stayed in the box and people didn't get them out. And so it's actually better for our volunteers to do a little investment in their equipment, and therefore they're a little bit more motivated to be a part of it. But I would say along the lines of equity that we talked about earlier, you know, if we've got a volunteer that wants to be a part of it but cannot afford a rain gauge, we do have ways to get them a gauge if they can't afford it.
Thanks, Noah. That sounds great. My next question is for Kim. The question is, what if somebody makes an incorrect report?
Well, the answer is it's in the database. because there are so many reports that are good, that single incorrect report really has no effect on the overall quality of the data. It just doesn't matter. And again, it's because it's crowdsourced. And since it's crowdsourced, a bad report or an incorrect report winds up just simply being buried by the crowd. Now, they're free. If it's truly an incorrect report, they just fat-fingered the menu. Well, they can submit another one, and that's fine too. But we don't bother to try to filter those out, mainly because if we can't tell the difference between a mistake and a real report, we don't have any good way to QC it. And if the mistake is so egregious, like 5-inch hail instead of snow, it filters itself out.
Great, thank you, Kim. The next question is for Allison. Allison, are you taking any specific actions to make GLOBE a more diverse and inclusive community?
Yes, we are actually taking specific steps towards that goal. It's something that we've thought about for a long time, and in fact, NSF had helped fund a diversity boot camp that GLOBE was one of the recipients of an award for, so that was really helpful to help get things started. And then actually this February, we're kicking off a meeting with a task force for diversity, equity, and inclusion to help really think about that in the intentional way that Kenny described earlier. And so if you're part of the GLOBE community or you're interested in the topic, you can check out the globe.gov website, and if you go to news and events, you'll see the call for nominations that you can self-nominate for to be part of that task force.
Great, thanks, Allison. The next question, NOAA, back to you. Do volunteers have to be able to monitor their gauges all the time? And what if they go on vacation?
Yeah, great question. We actually get emails all the time of people asking if they can go on vacation. Yes, please go on vacation. The typical report is a 24-hour report, so you do it once per day, but it is a volunteer network, and so we can't make everyone report every single day. We do encourage it. It's nice to get in the habit, and if you're reporting a 0, that can confirm that no rain fell, and you get a complete data set. But in general, oh, well, I actually just lost my train of thought there. So sorry about that.
No problem, but it sounds like that, yes, there are ways to ensure that people can still take a little time off and still participate.
Yes, by all means. That was the final thought that I was going to have, that if you do miss a day, you can submit what's called a multi-day accumulation report. And so if you were gone over the weekend or went on vacation, you can still submit data that covers the time that you were gone, or you just start back from fresh when you get back. And if you miss some days, it's not the end of the world. Right. Thanks for getting me back on track there.
Hey, no problem. Thank you. The next question is for Kim. Could you remind us the upcoming changes to the Emping app, for example, adding snow depth?
Well, again, these changes are dependent on funding. But the idea is we want to add estimated snow depth. This is different from COCO-RAS. COCO-RAS once measured snow depth, but because Emping is categorical, that is, you can't really enter a number. Just like for the hail size, you choose a number. In this case, people are going to choose like 1 inch, 2 inch, 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 10, something like that. We're going to use those numbers, and if we get enough of them, we can actually analyze those onto a regular grid and get gridded snow depth. And if we continue to get enough of them, we can then take a time difference of those grids and figure out what the accumulation rate is over a short time. This is going to be pretty useful for places like where I live, Norman, Oklahoma, that get snow, but it doesn't stay on the ground very long. And if it covers the ground, it can truly affect the local forecast quite a bit. And if it's not included in the models, then the models aren't properly initialized and all kinds of things could go wrong with the forecast. So that's the idea behind the estimated snow depth.
Thanks, Kim. That helps. Appreciate it. So we need to pass it back to Kelly now to continue on, but if you've provided a question, don't worry, we'll circle back at the end and catch up on those.
Great, thank you, Bethany. And thanks again, everyone, for your great questions. We'll now begin our final section with some more examples of citizen science. We're going to start with Dan O'Keefe talking about the salmon ambassadors. Dan is with Michigan Sea Grant and will discuss how anglers report information on identified stocked and wild Chinook salmon in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron.
Yeah, so the Salmon Ambassadors Program was possible because of a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service mass marking program. And since 2012, all of the Chinook salmon stocked in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron have had their adipose fin clipped. And this means for the first time, anglers have been able to catch a fish and tell at a glance whether or not that fish was stocked or whether it was produced in the wild. And the history of the Great Lakes fishery really involves a lot of fish stocking. The whole salmon program began in the late 1960s. So there's this perception among anglers that all of their fish are stocked, but that's not really true. So this was a way to engage them in looking at their own catches and ground truthing it for themselves. When we developed this, we worked closely with state agencies like Michigan Department of Natural Resources to find out how we could collect useful information and allow anglers to provide data on what they were seeing from their own catches. But we also wanted input from sport fishing groups because we didn't want to ask too much. We wanted to make sure people were going to follow through with this by making it simple. So we developed the poster on the right side of the screen there. We had a simple message, as simple as 1, 2, 3, measure the length of the fish, check for the fin clip, and record some basic catch info, such as the location of your catch and the date. And we distributed printed data logs that were pretty popular, and we got close to 200 people registered, 260 surveys returned, and we got data in complete data sets for over 10,000 salmon. And that was really important for the biologists to stress this completeness of the data sets. We asked people to measure every single Chinook salmon caught. That includes fish that were released along with those that were kept. So it was a kind of unique way to get at those released fish as well. I think one of the big keys to any success of any project like this in the Great Lakes has been circling back to the anglers. A lot of these volunteers are members of sport fishing clubs, and they always appreciate getting back the data that they actually collected. So there's a lot of outreach going around to clubs, speaking to people and letting them know what it was that they found throughout the course of their participation. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Dan. Our next presenter will tell us about taking the pulse of our planet with Nature's Notebook. Jake Weltzine with the U.S. Geological Survey will show us how data collected by citizen scientists since 1954 is used to create and validate maps of changes in the timing of the onset of spring across the nation.
Well, thank you very much. It's been really exciting to hear about these different projects where there's a whole lot of collaborations going on between organizations to create some really neat products. And this is another one, as you can kind of tell from all the logos on the slide. But before we start talking about that a little bit, I'd like you to just step back and think for a moment, where were you this spring? Whereabouts in the U.S. were you when you sort of saw that first indicator of spring, maybe the robin arriving in your backyard or daffodils coming out? And did it seem this spring, whether it was relatively early or relatively late compared to the long-term average? Like, oh, those daffodils are coming out really late. In fact, there is a lot of variation in the timing of the onset of spring. And this year, if you were anywhere between Oklahoma and North Dakota or Seattle to Detroit, the onset of spring, as measured by the Citizen Science Project, was really late, on the order of about up to 2 weeks late compared to the long-term average. In contrast, if you were down further south, Nashville on down towards Jacksonville or over in the Imperial Valley of California, spring was actually early, up to 2 weeks early. So there's a lot of variation in the onset of spring at a national scale. And these data are used, we're leveraging citizen science data that have been collected since 1954 and looking at how the onset of spring varies from one year to the next relative to that long-term 30-year average. So this is a great example of how citizen scientists are helping to create national scale inference. We actually take data collected on the ground, link it up to climatological data from weather stations, and create models that enable us to create these kinds of maps. We run these data, we run the models daily, and so you can actually watch spring roll up across the nation, kind of like the green wave. And here, if it's early, it's red, and if it was late, like it was this year in so much of the U.S., a lot of flooding happened as well, very cold, cold in late spring. You can actually see these changes through time. These data are actually used as actually global change climate change indicators. The U.S. Global Change Research Program has a national climate indicator system. This onset of spring indicator is used there. EPA's climate change indicator of the U.S. as well. So again, citizen science data that have been collected through time can be used to create models like this that then we can integrate with data, say from PRISM to get the long-term average, or NOAA's NCEP data sets to create short-term forecasts. So go to our website, usampn.org, which is where the data are housed and where the models are built and produced. But you can participate as a citizen science or use the Nature's Notebook platform to participate either as an individual or as groups to help collect data to build new models or to validate these kinds of models. So again, by working together, we can integrate data from across the nation. In fact, we've got about 20 million records now on many species, and we can start to create more and more models like this that take advantage of the great NOAA weather products so we can do ecological forecasting like what you see here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. For our final presentation, we will hear from Berlin Birkmeyer with NOAA Fisheries Service. She's going to tell us about Stellar Watch. More than 10,000 volunteers are reviewing photos taken in the Aleutian Islands to track stellar sea lions and helping recover the population. Berlin?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to start by saying Katie Sweeney was actually the lead on this project, but she was unable to be here today, so I get the opportunity to share it with you all. So to start, a little background. The western stock of stellar sea lions was listed as endangered in 1997. And though the population as a whole began to recover in 2002, we have not seen any recovery in the population west of Samalga Pass, seen on the map below. The western Aleutian Island region has declined about 94% in the last 30 years. So in order to better understand the survival and the birth rates and movement of stellars out there, NOAA Fisheries expanded their mark and recapture study into the Aleutian Islands in 2011. Since scientists can only really re-site marked animals from ship and aerial surveys in Alaska for a few weeks during the summer, in 2002 we placed remote cameras at known stellar sea lion sites to capture images, such as this one, if you can hit next on the slide, about every 10 minutes during daylight hours throughout the entire year. So we currently have 24 cameras at 7 different sites, and they can collect up to 1 million images to analyze every year. So even between us here and volunteers, we just couldn't keep up with that volume. So we decided to turn to citizen scientists for help, and on March 15th, 2017, we launched Stellar Watch on Zooniverse.org. Zooniverse is a crowdsourcing website that uses online participants from around the world to help with over 100 different projects now, I believe. Stellar Watch involves 2 different workflows. The first is presence or absence, which just asks the volunteers to say whether stellars are present in an image or not. And if there are animals present, the image will move to the second workflow, which is presence of marked animals, which gives them the option to classify the image as having no marked animals or having marked animals where you either can or cannot read the markings. Overall, Stellar Watch was a very helpful project for us. In the first 6 months, we accumulated over 7,000 volunteers and over 1 million classifications. And if you can hit next on the slide again. Today, we are still working through our first year of images, but we have a total of almost 170,000 retired images, which is great. In addition to helping us get through hundreds of thousands of photos, it has also been a really great opportunity for outreach and education of all of the volunteers on Stellar Watch. It did not come without its challenges. such as keeping up with the talk forum, maintaining participation, and of course, we still have a lot of images to finalize as they're completed in Zooniverse. But overall, it's been successful, and moving forward, we always work to maintain engagement of our citizen scientists, and we are going to start analyzing the images that were classified through Zooniverse soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Berlin. It's time for some questions about these three wonderful presentations. What questions do you have for these presenters? Bethany?
Thanks, Kelly. First question for Dan, back to the Salmon Ambassador Program. Are there other agencies that are collecting data on Chinook salmon? And if so, how does Salmon Ambassadors fit within the other research efforts?
Yeah, the state agencies around Lake Michigan, the Departments of Natural Resources in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan all collect data along with Fish and Wildlife Service, but a lot of their collections are from tournaments, so they're really collecting fish that people have harvested, and typically in a setting that they're trying to target the largest fish out there, whereas our program allows us to collect data on fish that are released and caught outside of these tournaments.
Great, thanks, Dan. And then Jake, a question for you. Does Nature's Notebook program still collect data using paper form? And are you able to making it possible to collect the data through a mobile app? And then are there trade-offs between using paper and an app? A multi-part question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we started with the old-fashioned cards, and people would mail their cards in back in the 1950s to a central location, and then they would be transcribed. We've slowly moved it through time over into more modern databases, but we still you can still print out paper data sheets if you would like. However, we've rolled out apps on both platforms and Nature's Notebook, and it's been very popular. In fact, about 1/3 of the data that we get each year now come in via mobile apps. So if you might have, say, a sugar maple in your front yard, or you might be watching robins, you can actually just pull your phone out on either platform and participate in Nature's Notebook that way. You do have some advantages that the phone is in your pocket and the paper might be back in the living room. But the paper might be something that gives you a way to have some tangible evidence of those data through time. You can actually use it and go back in and change your observations if you realize you made an error as well. So we track those observations digitally through time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then Berlin, this question's for you. How much time are professional staff spending on quality assurance of the images being classified by the volunteers? Berlin?
Oh, sorry.
No
Good question. Yeah, luckily for us, or for each image in the mark and absence workflow, we have 7 different people for that one and 13 different for the presence of marked animals workflow. So we have, in and of the volunteers themselves, a lot of people look at them and they come through when we get the data back. We know how many people said what for which image, so we can go through, and if 13 people said there is obviously a marked animal and you can read the image, we know those are high priority images, and then we go back through every image. The Stellar Watch was a great method to sort of sift through photos that didn't have any stellars in them at all, but we will go back through all of the images that we get back out of Zooniverse, but even then it saved us a ton of time, so that was great.
Great, thank you. John, for you or Laura, has NOAA taken an official stance on the term citizen science versus community science? The recent Sea Grant Citizen Science Vision specifically calls for community science. So thoughts on that?
I'm laughing because we just had a conversation this morning. John, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, that is a great question, and as Laura said, one we've been talking a lot about. I think we're going to engage our community practice in a more in-depth conversation. for people who don't know, there is concern about the term citizen science having the word citizen in it, which may feel non-inclusive for some people in terms of people who may not necessarily be citizens of this country. And so that's a very realistic concern, and some projects have been adopting community science as an alternative, and there are additional alternatives like volunteer monitoring and such. We at NOAA allow any of our projects certainly to use any term that they feel most appropriate. At the NOAA level, we're currently still using citizen science because it does tie into the broadest used term and the one most commonly understood and defined, such as in the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act and such. But we are considering putting it alternatively, also known as community science, and other terms in our web pages and publications to give a nod to those alternative terms. And this is something the field's been talking about for a few years now. Citizen science, the term citizen science still has the biggest buy-in by far and is the most defined. Community science, there are some concerns because there are additional definitions of community science, but we're going to continue to monitor where things go, and certainly open to whatever term works best. We don't want to get hung up on a name and so much. And certainly, if audiences, projects are working with have concerns about citizen science, then certainly community science or others are very applicable. Laura, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you summarized that well.
Yeah, thanks, John. It sounds like a delicate balance, but one that it's good folks are giving thought to. So,
absolutely.
Kelly, I think that wraps up the questions that we've got for today.
Yes, by any name, it's a pretty cool idea. Citizen science or whatever name. But that wraps up today's 3-minute thesis webinar. My thanks to all of our panelists today for your excellent presentations. I hope you all have enjoyed them as much as I have. At the end of this session, I want to remind you there will be a few brief questions, and we really do mean brief, that will appear on your screen. Please take 1 more minute to respond to these. Your feedback is crucial to help us plan future webinars like this one. And we'd like to know if you have more than 1 person participating from a single registration. So let us know how many people are in the room. I'd like to thank John McLaughlin, who provided ideas and guidance as we plan this webinar, Jeff Zeltwanger for his critical technical support, and a special thanks to Bethany Perry for her amazing support and her ability to juggle a million tasks. As a reminder, this webinar was organized by the NOAA Central Region Collaboration Team. If you'd like to learn more about us, check out our webpage at www.regions.noaa.gov/central. And I want to say that the recording for today's webinar and the presentation slides and additional resources will all be available early next week on NOAA's Central Region Collaboration Team website that I just said, regions.noaa.gov/central. If you have any questions, please contact me, kelly.pirtle@noaa.gov or bethany.perry@noaa.gov. And thanks again, everyone, for your participation, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.